Franklin Graham spent decades as one of the most recognizable and forceful voices in American Christianity. He prayed beside the ruins of Ground Zero after the September 11th attacks, stood in the rain during Donald Trump's inauguration, and entered dangerous regions where few religious leaders were willing to go. For years, he appeared untouchable, carrying the Graham name into politics, disaster zones, and global ministry work. But by the end of 2025, the stories surrounding him began to change. Questions surfaced about relief money connected to Haiti. Rumors spread about possible federal investigations, and critics once again focused on the enormous salary he received while leading two massive nonprofit organizations. Supporters defended him by pointing to the millions of people aided through Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Still, at 72 years old, many believed the foundation around him was beginning to crack, and whispers about retirement and succession grew louder than ever before. Long before the controversies and political battles, Franklin's life began in the mountains of North Carolina. He was born on July 14, 1952, in Asheville, the fourth of 5 children born to Billy Graham and Ruth Bell Graham. The family lived in a rustic cabin called Little Piney Cove near Montreat in the Appalachian Mountains. To outsiders, it looked peaceful and isolated, surrounded by forests and fresh mountain air. Yet the calm atmosphere did not last long. As Billy Graham's popularity exploded across America, strangers constantly appeared outside the family home. Tourists walked up to the cabin, peered through windows, knocked on doors, and treated the property like a public attraction. Some days brought dozens of visitors, while other times nearly 100 people showed up. The quiet life Ruth Graham wanted for her children slowly disappeared beneath endless attention. Billy Graham spent much of his life traveling and preaching to enormous crowds around the world, leaving Ruth to manage the household alone most of the time. Franklin later remembered feeling overwhelmed by the pressure that came with his father's fame. The family even bought more land in an effort to push strangers farther away, but the problem never truly ended. Matters became more serious when threatening letters began arriving at the house. Some came from critics angry at Billy Graham's preaching, while others came from unstable individuals obsessed with him. By the 1970s, one threat even warned of death. The FBI stepped in and recommended fences, security gates, and stronger protection around Little Piney Cove. What once felt like a peaceful mountain home slowly transformed into something resembling a guarded compound. Franklin himself was never the calm, obedient child many expected the son of Billy Graham to become. He loved hunting, fishing, motorcycles, and exploring the mountains, far more than church services or Bible studies. Ruth Graham tried to discipline him with creativity and firmness. On cold mornings when he refused to get out of bed for school, she sometimes slid firecrackers beneath his bedroom door to blast him awake. Franklin admired adventure and freedom, while his father spent most of the year preaching about faith and morality across the globe. The gap between them widened as Franklin grew older. One childhood moment, however, stayed with him forever. In 1957, when he was only 5 years old, he traveled with Billy Graham to New York City and witnessed the famous crusades at Madison Square Garden. The meetings drew such huge crowds that they continued for weeks. During the final gathering, tens of thousands filled the arena, while even more people waited outside. Franklin stood there staring at the sea of faces, listening to his father speak. Though he would later rebel against nearly everything connected to religion, that experience planted something deep inside him. As a teenager, Franklin's rebellion became impossible to ignore. His parents sent him to the Stony Brook School hoping strict discipline would guide him in the right direction, but it only made him push back harder. He smoked, broke rules, and challenged authority at every opportunity. Eventually, he was expelled, embarrassing the Graham family publicly. Back home, the situation did not improve. Franklin stayed out late, fought frequently, ignored responsibilities, and clashed constantly with his mother. Ruth Graham sometimes climbed onto the roof just to knock on his window and wake him up. Later, while attending LeTourneau University, Franklin repeated the same destructive behavior and was expelled once again. By the time he reached adulthood, many people viewed him as reckless, wild, and impossible to control. The following years were filled with dangerous behavior. Franklin rode motorcycles at high speeds through mountain roads, drank heavily, and got involved in fights. He later admitted he was living far from the values his father preached. Yet beneath all the chaos, something inside him was quietly changing. That transformation finally arrived in 1974, during a lonely night in Jerusalem. Alone in a hotel room with no distractions around him, Franklin opened a Bible, prayed, and experienced what he later described as total surrender to God. He said everything he had been running from suddenly caught up with him in that moment. After that experience, his life began moving in a completely different direction. He joined Samaritan's Purse on mission trips and encountered suffering up close in refugee camps, hospitals, and war zones. What once felt distant suddenly became real. In 1979, at only 27 years old, Franklin became president of the organization. Many doubted whether a former rebel with such a troubled past could lead an international ministry, but he pushed forward anyway. Throughout the 1980s, he traveled into dangerous regions including Honduras, Sudan, and Afghanistan, delivering humanitarian aid and learning how to manage large-scale relief operations. One especially risky mission took place in China during unrest in 1989. Franklin helped transport aid into tense and heavily monitored areas where a single mistake could have ended in disaster. Billy Graham later called it one of the most dangerous missions the family had ever faced. By the early 1990s, Samaritan's Purse had expanded dramatically, distributing millions of dollars in aid around the world. Franklin built a reputation for personally entering conflict zones instead of remaining safely behind a desk. In 2001, another major chapter began when Franklin took over leadership of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Unlike his father, whose style was often softer and more diplomatic, Franklin spoke directly and frequently embraced controversy. Some supporters admired his bluntness, while critics felt he created unnecessary division. Even so, he continued leading major crusades and public events. In 2005, a large New York gathering drew huge crowds similar to the crusades Billy Graham once led decades earlier. After Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2006, Franklin appeared in the city offering prayers, aid, and encouragement to families who had lost nearly everything. He also became closely linked to moments of national tragedy. Following the September 11th attacks, Franklin stood among firefighters and rescue workers at Ground Zero, praying in the middle of smoke and debris. But his outspoken comments about religion and politics repeatedly sparked backlash. One of the biggest controversies erupted after he described Islam in a 2001 interview as a very evil and wicked religion. He argued that Islam's teachings were connected to violence and terrorism. Those remarks caused outrage, especially when he later delivered a Good Friday sermon at the Pentagon in 2003. Muslim groups protested his appearance, and more than 75 Muslim employees at the Pentagon signed a petition against him. Despite the backlash, the Army allowed the event to proceed. The disputes continued for years. In 2010, an invitation for Franklin to speak at a National Day of Prayer event was canceled after complaints from critics who accused him of spreading anti-Muslim rhetoric. Franklin and his supporters argued he was being censored for expressing Christian beliefs. Around the same time, he published a controversial New York Times opinion piece arguing against the International Criminal Court pursuing Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir over genocide charges in Darfur. Franklin claimed arresting Bashir could destroy a fragile peace agreement that had ended Sudan's devastating civil war. Activists accuse him of prioritizing politics over justice for the hundreds of thousands killed in Darfur. Later in 2009, Franklin stirred more controversy during a CNN interview where he claimed true Islam could not exist peacefully in America. He criticized certain forms of Sharia law and warned that radical Islamic movements wanted to spread influence throughout the West. By 2010, Time magazine quoted him describing Islam as a religion associated with war. These statements later contributed to visa problems in the United Kingdom between 2017 and 2020, where officials feared his appearances could provoke hatred. Away from public battles, Franklin's private life told a different story. In August 1974, he married Jane Austen Cunningham in a simple ceremony held on the Graham family lawn, with Billy Graham officiating. Jane remained beside him through his rebellious youth, spiritual transformation, and rise to international leadership. Together, they raised 4 children and eventually welcomed 13 grandchildren. Because Franklin traveled more than 200 days each year, Jane often held the family together alone while he worked in dangerous regions around the world. In Lebanon during 1979, Franklin reportedly came frighteningly close to sniper fire. Even decades later, Jane remained by his side through heart surgery in 2021 and worsening knee problems by 2025. Their son, Will Graham, gradually emerged as the most likely successor to the Graham legacy. After studying religion at Liberty University and earning a master's degree from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, Will entered ministry work and eventually became executive vice president of BGEA. By 2023, he had already preached at more than 50 crusades worldwide. As Franklin's health declined, many insiders quietly believed Will would eventually take over leadership of the organization completely. The wider Graham family also struggled with serious personal pain. Franklin's sister Ruth battled depression, multiple divorces, and addiction problems affecting her children. Eventually, she wrote openly about brokenness and grace in books, like In Every Pew Sits a Broken Heart. Franklin's younger brother Ned secretly fought cocaine addiction for nearly 2 decades before resigning from ministry in 2007 after his struggles became public. Though he later rebuilt his life and founded the ministry East Gates, the difficulties inside the Graham family shattered the image of perfection many outsiders once believed existed. By late 2025, conversations about Franklin Graham's future became impossible to ignore. Reports claimed political involvement and support for Donald Trump had cost the ministries nearly $35 million in donations after the release of the Access Hollywood tape in 2016. At the same time, Franklin's health visibly worsened. After undergoing surgery for constrictive pericarditis in 2021 and battling serious knee problems in 2025, he no longer maintained the pace he once did. Staff members reportedly noticed shorter meetings and signs of exhaustion. Insiders increasingly believed Will Graham would soon assume full leadership of BGA, while Franklin focused whatever remaining strength he had on Samaritan's Purse. Even as questions about succession intensified, the ministries continued major humanitarian work worldwide, including aid efforts in Ukraine that reportedly reached millions of people. Yet despite those accomplishments, Franklin Graham remained one of the most polarizing religious figures in America. To supporters, he was a fearless defender of Christianity, willing to stand against political correctness and cultural change. To critics, he represented the dangerous blending of religion, politics, and power. Either way, by the end of 2025, it was becoming clear that the era of Franklin Graham dominating the evangelical world might finally be nearing its end.